I welcome you all on behalf of Directorate of Film Festivals. So today's topic of this Panchayat is BRICS co-production. Khair Bashkatao, he's a producer from Russia. Panelist number 2, Miss Meg Rickards. She's a director from South Africa. Panelist number 3, Mr. Vikramjit Roy. He's a producer from India. Panelist number 4, Ms. Helosa Zinzenzi. She's a producer from Brazil. Zhao Qinqi from China. He's a director. Who's a national award-winning film critic from India. And keep your mobile phones switched off or on silent mode. Thank you so much.
Of Film Panchayat. Today we are discussing BRICS co-production, the way forward. It could be it could be interpreted in a very definitive way, and we could say that this, BRICS co-production, ways that this can be achieved. And I think we would focus on that more than on the first, because we are not sure how this can actually be implemented. And so I think I'll start with you, Vikramjit, because you are, NFDC and India. So do you think India, as the world's largest film producing nation, has a role to play in bringing these 5 nations together on a co-production platform? I mean, is there a...
Thanks, Shabal. First of all, a warm welcome to each one of you to India. Absolutely, I think given our the way the film industry is structured, and given the talent base that we have and the stories that we have, India will play certainly a very crucial role to bring about collaborations with all these lovely countries who have their own stories and their own creative bases. Collaboration, as I learned, is language agnostic, is country agnostic. It is, when we did in NFDC, the National Film Development Corporation, which is the domestic body that develops and produces cinema in India on behalf of the government. It's a government institution. For a film called Kissa, which was in the Punjabi language, the language that is spoken up in the north of India, we had a German, we had a Dutch, we had a French co-producer. A film like Lunchbox that had German, French, American producers involved. There's a film called Sunrise, again, which the NFDC did, which had a French and Indian producer. There's a film that Mr. Gautam Ghosh, who's a celebrated filmmaker, is doing, a film called Lala in Hindi, which is an Italian co-producer. So I think and recently Zhuangzhang, which was shot in India, is an Indo-Chinese co-production. And I feel that given our creative sensibilities from the BRICS countries, and given the fact that we have such a huge creative base both in India and in these great countries, it would be of interest to furthering not only the film fraternity and the film boundary, but it would be of interest to tell different stories by producers who are intent on pushing the creative envelope. It is not language agnostic, and I think India, given its sensibilities and given the rapport that exists between these countries and India would and should be on the forefront in this matter. And I would urge all private producers, like the big Indian studios that make Bollywood films or that make Indian language films, to certainly experiment, given that there is this harmony and given that there is this spirit of collaboration, to further push the filmic or the creative envelope.
Yeah. My question to Mr. Hoover would be, because India and China are these two very populous nations, and if these two nations get together, then they have a huge market. They wouldn't even need the rest of the world. So is there a way that the two countries can actually work more closely in the matter of film production?
我觉得这个中国现在这个电影的产量很多哈，但是在这之前呢，我们也知道，就是印度的宝莱坞的年产量非常高，因此我觉得就是说现在中国的市场也很大，所以就是这个两国之间的合作呢，确实是有比较好的前景。所以就是去年我在印度还拍摄了，其实也是大家一起拍摄了印度部分，而且合作了也很好，效果也不错。
So, I know that Bollywood has the larger reach, and the Chinese market is also very big. Last year, I have shot my movie in India and different parts of the country, and now the Chinese market is also very huge. So there are a lot of potential when two countries can do together and capture the market.
And my question to Meg, to begin with, would be, I mean, India and South Africa have a lot in common, I mean, culturally and historically. So, do you see the two countries work? I mean, we've had a few films being, that have been collaborative efforts, but do you see more of that happening in the near future?
I would love to see more of it happening. I do think there's a very strong link, of course. I was just telling my colleague that there are over 1 million Indian people living in Durban. So I feel quite at home in this beautiful city. There's a lot that feels familiar, and I think there's a natural cultural affinity in many ways. So I would love to see more collaborations happening. And I was really pleased to learn when I was speaking with my colleague, Mr. Terence Khumalo from the National Film and Video Foundation in South Africa this morning, that there are discussions underway for an Indian-South African treaty, and that's imminent. And I was really happy. I think they're stories which would be very natural to tell together. One which I would love to tell would be of the young Gandhi and his time spent in South Africa, because I think that's a time that's not known much about, and it's where he formed his satyagraha philosophy, was during his time in South Africa. So that would be one story I, for example, would love to do as a co-production.
Yeah, but there's been one film that Shyam Benegal made called The Making of the Mahatma.
Oh, when was that? Because the one I heard about was a long time ago.
15,
Yes,
16 years ago.
yes.
Which talked about precisely what you are talking about, the evolution of Mahatma
I
Gandhi.
do know about that. I think it would be,
Yeah,
there
so
would be a possibility
I mean,
for a different film for a fresh
Absolutely.
generation.
Yeah.
That's just one example. There are many others, of course.
Yeah, but I mean, what is the penetration of Indian films in South Africa? I mean, do you get a lot of Indian films
We do.
playing in the auditorium?
We do. We have some, especially Bollywood movies are popular. And there are some playing, there's one cinema in Cape Town which plays them. There's not widespread penetration, and in Durban there's quite a big following as well. So we're aware of Bollywood cinema, and it is a thing, and it does have a following. But I think it's a more specifically following from Indian South Africans. I don't think it's widespread among the general population.
Okay.
As far as I know.
Coming to you, Mikhail, my question to you would be again similar to what I asked her, because Russia and India also share a lot of historical links, and so is there, I mean, are you people also looking at India as a market of films that are culturally, films that can culturally travel across both the countries? I mean,
Да, мы, конечно, очень хотим сотрудничать и с Индией, и с Бразилией, с Китаем. Но, к сожалению, у нас сейчас никаких вот проектов нет, но было бы замечательно, если бы это произошло, потому что с Индией нас связывает то, что мы в советское время снимали кино совместно, и мы прекрасно знаем актеров индийских и любим их. И, конечно, бы хотелось, чтобы эти традиции вернулись.
Yes, we also want, we know India is a huge market, and we know every Indian hero in the, like Rishi Kapoor and Amir Khan like this. So we also want, and I am very happy I am with Indian market.
okay. And to Aloise, my question would be, I mean, I have this story that I keep hearing about this Colonel Suresh Biswas. I don't know whether you know of him. He was a man who went from Calcutta to to Brazil in the last century. I mean, in the 19th century, and towards the end of the 19th century, and he actually fought in the Brazilian, army at that time. And a lot of people in Calcutta tell me this story, and they keep threatening to make a film on him. I mean, I don't know. I mean,
it could be a co-production, right?
and so would Brazil have a market for a film that goes from India with an Indian story at the heart of it?
Yes, I think we do have. I mean, in Brazil we are a very mixed country, so I think that all cultures and all histories, I mean, they interest us. Unfortunately, we have a very big deal in distribution still in Brazil, since it's mostly dominated by the Americans. So many of the cultures and the author films, they sometimes don't reach public, or when they go, they just spend like a week in the screen, and we don't have time to get to know the others. But I think that definitely we do have, I mean, a lot in common. We know that Brazil has a co-production agreement with India, and although I have never heard about any co-production being made, actually, I mean, but I think it's more a lack of getting approach to the co-producers and to meet people and make it possible.
Yeah, and football is big in Brazil, and I mean, India is not that great as a footballing nation, but we also have a huge fan following. I mean, football would be one sport that could actually yield a film that could travel not just in Brazil and India, but probably all over the world. I mean,
Sure.
that's something that maybe India and Brazil can look.
Sure. I mean, if someone has
Yeah.
something to tell and maybe has a good history, we can come together and talk about it. In Brazil, it has a huge public. I mean, it's really, really popular. But since India has so many inhabitants, I mean, it will be so popular as well. So I think it's completely possible.
But I mean, Vikramji, the cultural nuances and also the sort of predilections of the audience in each country would be different. I mean, an Indian, big fat Indian wedding might not work in China or in South Africa or in Russia. But I mean, so where do we find the meeting ground where we can do a Chinese story with in an Indian style, or an Indian story in a Chinese style, which can work in both markets? I mean, is it possible creatively to actually do that?
Absolutely. So I'd like to break it into two halves. First is the Indian perspective. We have to be very clear. There has to be clarity of thought on with the producer and the filmmaker. Let us assume in our example that it's an Indian filmmaker. So we have to have, the Indian producer must have clarity of thought as to why is he doing this production? Why is he doing this international production? And why is he doing it, say, with Brazil or Russia or India, Brazil, Russia, China, and South Africa? What is the leverage that he's seeking for? There are two kinds of leverages. One is a cultural leverage. Does he genuinely believe that this, besides being a universal story, will appeal, say in my case, let's say the example with Brazil? Will it culturally appeal to them? Naturally, for me to pitch a story to any of these filmmakers here, I'd have to know whether it culturally appeals to them, the subject matter of it, whether their audiences would be able to comprehend and understand and appreciate this Indian story. Let us assume it does, number one. Number two, what is the role that I'm seeking from my counterpart in either Brazil, Russia, or China, or South Africa? Why am I enlisting, why am I doing this collaboration? So in all our films that NFDC did collaborations, we were very clear that it's primarily an Indian story that will cross over intellectually, creatively, and there would be a sensitivity that audience would understand, and the international producer would be able to take this film to greater markets, given his understanding of how language cinema, which is different from Hollywood cinema, would play out in other markets, and then how he would leverage the various festivals that there are. For example, in our case with Brazil, she would be able to, if I were to do a co-production with her, I would rely on her to understand how this would play out in Latin American festivals and how a sales agent would be attracted to it. Is there a play for it? Would I be able to leverage my collaboration with her to be able to play out in the greater festivals like Cannes, Berlin, Toronto, Sundance, etc.? These two are imperatives. I cannot just get into it because, hey, I want to produce a film with China. No, it doesn't work that way. So this sensibility from an Indian perspective is imperative. Second is, let us look at it from their perspective. They're all producers, filmmakers. My film, my story, my concept has to ensure that these filmmakers, be they producer or be they director, move on to a higher level because of their association with my film. Because a producer and a director has a portfolio against his or her name. And this portfolio must enable these filmmakers to ensure tomorrow that their portfolio is widely appreciated, their company is widely appreciated, that there is a certain equity, brand equity, which these producers, these filmmakers will be enhanced, for them to say that, look, this is a language co-production that we're doing with India. Please, Match Factory, all the great sales agents, distributors, come in and look at our portfolio. Festival agents, look at our portfolio. This is what we are supporting. So this collaboration has to be, in the truest sense of the word, it has to be collaborative. Otherwise, there's no point in it.
Absolutely. I mean, see, in Europe, the European Union has a mechanism which helps filmmakers of different EU countries to come together and work. Similarly, all the francophone countries are backed by France, to make, North Africa and countries, countries in that part of the world. So why isn't, now that there's this kind of loose structure that BRICS, has, can't there be a division that actually looks at, the popular, part of culture and look, and you look at producing films together that can be marketed in all the 5 countries and elsewhere. So is that a possibility? Do you think the government would be sort of keen to go there? I mean, that kind of formal co-production agreement.
What I can say is that in the last few years, the India Pavilion, which is in the Cannes Film Festival, has organized for various one-on-one dialogues with countries with whom India has a co-production treaty. If you recollect, you are a regular visitor at the India Pavilion, and there have been several one-on-one dialogues that we have with our counterparts in Canada, Australia, Brazil. We've had dialogues with them. The Film Bazaar again has a co-production market that it's held in November from 21st to 24th, and there are a lot of delegations that come down. The government is definitely trying. I mean, this is one forum that at least a conversation has begun with filmmakers from within BRICS, and I guess the footprint of it will have to be kind of pushed by all the countries. I now head the Film Facilitation Office in India, which is a part of the Ministry of I&B's initiative to ensure that greater films, international films, are shot in India. When we have our web portal ready, we will ensure that all the guidelines of these various countries towards production is enlisted. And if there are co-production treaties that have been signed between India, like the Indo-Brazilian treaty will be up there for reference. We will, I guess, as we go along, keep having these dialogues with various filmmakers. But I think at the end of the day, it is also imperative that the filmmaking community from India and the filmmaking community from the other countries, especially the filmmaking community from India, has to realize that how a Chinese production has kind of given it a certain leverage. I hope more people will follow. Similarly, it will wait for that one production to happen with South Africa, that one co-production to happen with South Africa, that one co-production to happen with Russia and with Brazil to give it a fillip. So somebody has to take that initiative also from the film industry in India to give it a kind of push.
So why not to form a group of producers from all 5 countries?
We'll let you ask the question later. Before we move forward, I mean, I'll try to understand how the markets work in these individual countries. With China, of course, there's a restriction for an Indian film distributor, producer, to go to China and actually release his film there, with a distributor there.
这就是一个发行的问题，就是说，可能，我主要拍片子哈，不是特别了解，但是每年可能有固定的好莱坞的电影在中国放映，我觉得今后会更广泛，因为在这之前我们也看过很多的印度电影，比如《流浪者之歌》，大篷车，还有一些电影，那么我觉得可能是不是还是需要跟中国的发行的环节进行协调和沟通，达到一个怎么说呢共识。我想应该还是有机会，因为大家还是很喜欢世界各国的电影的。
So, yeah, this is the problem we have in China, that there are the limited releases of Hollywood films, but gradually the things are changing, and Indian films are very famous in China and is getting popularity. For example, in 60s there was Avara and Raj Kapoor's different movies, and now is other in Bollywood movies are being very popular. So the future is bright, and he hopes that those restrictions will change very soon.
好像是不是那个三傻大闹宝莱坞，是不是在中国发行过？就前一段。是不是那个在中国上过院线？就是你知这个片子吗？闹宝莱坞的三傻大，我们翻译。
三个傻瓜。So the Three Idiots from the Bollywood is being very famous in China, and is 2-3.
Also PK, which is
还有一个
America's
那个
next
是
film.
PK， 那个是一样的演员的电影。
反正可能会也今后会越来越好，因为中国的观众其实对宝莱坞的印度的演员是很熟悉，也很喜欢。就是说，其实他们会有更好的市场和前景。今后这个可能是发行渠道需要疏通，我想大家肯定很想看到更多的印度电影。
So Indian films like PK and Three Idiots, so among the youth, is very popular these days. And if the situation goes on like this, so people are getting acquainted with Indian films, and they are liking it very much. So of course the things will change, and those restrictions will go away.
Shriman, may I ask him a question?
Yeah, sure.
So how was your Indian collaboration on your film? I believe you've done a film, Zhuangzhang, and your experience of shooting in India, and how did this film travel, and did the Indian producer also, what kind of support did they give, and why was the collaboration? If you could give us a little background.
去年就因为拍玄奘呢，我们是先拍了中国部分，包括中国的西域，就是新疆啊、甘肃，然后就是这个月我们来到了这个孟买和也到德里了，孟买还有是那个那烂陀，还有那个阿占陀石窟，那么拍摄了印度的部分。我觉得印度的宝莱坞的工作人员的专业素质很好，我们合作很默契。 包括服化道、摄影的机械等等方方面面的工作人员都是非常专业化的，因此呢，特别的满意。但是印度这点确实天气很热哈，给工作带来一些麻烦。但是我觉得两国的电影工作人员的合作非 非常好。从人的合作、情感的合作和工作专业上的合作都非常理想。可能就是唯一的有点需要完善的，可能就是这边的这个好像节奏上稍微的有点迟缓。其他的都还挺好的，很满意。
So last year when we finished our shooting in Xinjiang and Gansu province in China, we around July or August they came back to, came back to India, and we went to Mumbai, Aurangabad, Nalanda and other Ajanta, and they got tremendous support from the Indian side, and they are they were amazed by the expertise Indian side had, and technologically advanced, and shooting in the difficult conditions, and especially the weather is very hot here according to the Chinese climate conditions, so it was very tough to shoot here for them, but the Indian side helped them a lot and they made it possible, and they were very emotional, and he has the very emotional experiences, so, and is a very positive and very thankful to them still, and especially one difficulty they had regarding the food habits, and they had to at this some places they had to eat by their hands, so but that was also a good experience.
我觉得就是两国的这个人与人之间哈，就是可能恰恰是因为民族的不同，反而互相更加吸引。就是比如我们看印度人就是漂亮好看，怎么那个男的女的都这么漂亮哈。然后我们到纳兰陀去，一些游客，好像见我们也很新奇，就老找我们剧组的很多人合影照相，所以我觉得可能就是这种，地域不同、国家不同的，电影创作，其实反而更加具有吸引力和魅力。
In China, we have an impression that Indian people are very beautiful and very good looking. So when we came to India, and we found the similar, we found it right what we heard, and at many places people were very eager to click a picture with them, and so emotions are they are very emotion. Maybe we are different countries, maybe we have different nationalities, but the emotions are very similar.
那个我再说一个，就是我们工作的时候，因为团队非常庞大，它是中印两方面的工作人员，就等于成倍的增长，每天调度是挺有难度的。但是印方的工作人员很好，就为我们准备希望我们爱吃的，就是弄那个炉子和那个烤那个饼和那个鸡腿什么的吃。那么呢，每天我们工作人员都很满意啊，吃的很好，但是都要拿一大盘子在那等着现烤。就是可能也会影响那个拍摄的速度哈，就是说，反正就是挺好的，但是就可能这方面需要不断的改进吧。
And especially he still remembers that the Indian side, they always took care of their different needs, and their food, and that whatever they had, they tried to make it in the Chinese style to feed them, or so they were always up to, and they were on the toes to help them, and he can't forget all these the experiences. And the Indian side, we used to sit together, and Indian side and Chinese side, and every night, and we used to discuss, and those discussions were very fruitful to shoot the movie.
I think that's
one question that I have to ask is, I mean, do you have a distributor for this film in place in India? And the other thing is that Chinese cinema, Chinese films, a particular kind of Chinese cinema has been doing well globally, as you know and we all know. But India is one market China hasn't been able to conquer. I mean, I know in the American in the American box office, a lot of Chinese films have performed as well as a lot of big Hollywood films, and Jackie Chan is going to get the Lifetime Achievement Award, the Oscar this time, which is a recognition of the fact that he's a star, he's a global star. I mean, he's much bigger than any Indians, I mean, maybe all the Indian stars put together. So why is India such a difficult country for you, a difficult market for you? Do you have a sense of why that is happening?
我觉得可能是不是还是会不会有这个影片的方式和内容的这个差异，或者是不是印度的观众非常喜欢，这是不是一个原因？再有一个就是说，好莱坞可能是不是跟中国近些年合作比较多哈，因此它在传播上就会比较频繁一些。还有一个就是说，可能比如像我们拍玄奘，也就是说很支持国家投入很多，我们中影股份投入很多，但是就是说他毕竟是玄奘这个人，是不是他的传播的商业性上没有那么强，在中国上映还不错，但是他在网上的点播率非常高，而且评价很好。那我觉得可能就是是不是这些途径还需要怎么去加强，就是说拍大家都认为感兴趣的内容，可能是不是会更好？但是有一些追求的这种所谓比较个性和艺术的东西，可能是不是反而往往它缺少相应的商业性和娱乐性，因此这个传播就会差一点。是不是需要研究和提高一下这样的方式？
The first thing that Chinese film industry and the Hollywood has a very long history of collaboration. So it started long back. So that's why still they are in good shape. The market is in good shape right now. The second point, why India they haven't been able to penetrate Indian market, because there is lack of common grounds regarding exactly the same you were talking about, the topics and the themes which can satisfy both the sides and the larger populations. For example, he shot the movie Xuanzang, so Xuanzang has the part in the Indian history as well and the Chinese history as well. So that was the common topic. So those kind of topics, those kind of common grounds, we need to find, and we need to work on things to come up with such ideas which can satisfy both the population. Then only it will be possible to go for the further collaborations or further cooperations in regarding films.
还有一个就是说，比如说李安的电影《少年派的奇遇漂流》的那个电影，那个我不知道在印度怎么样，可能说在美国也不是很特别理想，但是在中国就特别好，而且大家通过那个片子特别喜欢印度和印度的这个故事啊演员，那可能是不是这就是比较好的一个方式哈？就是说能够选择更好的选题，能够被更多的人接受。可能李安恰恰用了一个国际化的语言表达了一个印度故事，但是被很多人接受了。
These stories which got famous in China, so those kind of stories need to be made so that it can reach to the larger populations. So, for example, the movies like Three Idiot and PK got famous in China, but he doesn't know how did it work in American market or Hollywood market. But such movies, such stories, which are very contemporary, which are a kind of a international touch in it, so that those kind of stories we need to make more.
Mikhail, I'll come to you now. As a critic, I can vouch that some of the best films being made in the world today come from still sort of stick to to their ground. I mean, they haven't sort of surrendered to the market for privately produced. I mean, films that are coming out of Russia today.
Конкретно вот тот фильм, который мы представляем на фестивале, большую часть денег нам выделило государство для того, чтобы мы, в общем, да, все деньги Так что государство, конечно, нам помогает в этом плане очень сильно.
Yes, in the BRICS, which in the festival, the movie, the film festival, yes, of course, the government give us money for this.
But is there also a very big private, production sector there in Russia, or are most films funded by the state, by the government?
Ну, большую часть денег государство, конечно, выделяет, но есть и частные проекты, естественно, как и, я думаю, у вас то же самое. Вот, поэтому ничего тут такого необычного у нас нет.
Most of the funding from the government. Yes, we also have private. So most of the funded from the government, like this.
So, I mean, if you have to work with Russia, you'll have to go through probably the government there. I mean,
But they also have a very big co-production market, the Moscow film production market, the Moscow co-production market. Maybe you could share some light and some information on that.
Moscow film production market. The question is whether he can share some light, and can he tell us something about the Moscow film production market?
Ну, благодаря Московскому кинофестивалю зрители, продюсеры знакомятся с кино из других стран, потому что не так много мест, где можно посмотреть кино, которое то же самое индийское кино, китайское, из других стран. Поэтому в качестве ознакомления это просто очень хорошая вещь. Другой возможности, наверное, у нас нет, как только вот кинофестиваль.
In the Moscow Film Festival, we have the Indian films and Chinese and other films.
Is there any co-production deals signed?
Вот, насколько мне известно, не так давно у нас вышел фильм, который называется «Родина». Он снимался в Гоа. Там были задействованы индийские актеры и индийские, часть группы даже была из Индии. Поэтому так вот навскидку, вот это вот последнее, что я знаю.
Yes, we also have co-production with the Indian markets, and we done in Goa and with Indian groups.
So my question to both Meg and Eloisa would be similar. I mean, how does it work in your countries? I mean, if a producer in India wants to make a film with South Africa and with Brazil, what is the way that he should, move forward? So you go first, Meg.
So I believe that the treaty between South Africa and India is imminent, and I think that's necessary for it to be easily facilitated. And then it's two producers work out an agreement together, and it does go also via the National Film and Video Foundation in South Africa. And the other great thing about doing a co-production with South Africa is that the can access not only government money through the National Film and Video Foundation, but also the Department of Trade and Industry rebate, which gives 35% back on South African spend.
So does an Indian producer have to hire technicians there in South Africa?
Yes. So there needs to be representation proportional to the budget. So say it's 50% split, then there needs to be creative and technical representation from both. And something I feel about this is I think it's a wonderful opportunity, but I think the stories need to be carefully chosen, because sometimes you watch a film, I remember watching a film last year which had a French actor in it, and it just didn't work. You felt this is a co-production movie from the first moment. So I think those creative choices need to be very carefully made, yeah. And I think stories also suitable for co-production is also just where there's really, really genuine human emotion, then the stories can travel. I mean, a film that I've seen twice now is The Lunchbox, and I think that's unfortunately only showed in the art house circuit in South Africa, which is very small, because it's a brilliant film. And people who've seen that respond to it it doesn't matter that it's completely within Indian culture because it's so universal, the themes of love and rejection and all those things. So I think that a story can work just and can travel across the cultures where the emotions are so strong and where there's such universal themes. There's absolutely no problem with empathy or identity there. Yeah.
And you, I mean,
Yes, and since there is a co-production agreement between India and Brazil, and we need to have like at least a 20% participation in the budget, for example, and also technical and artistic cooperation between the two companies to make it like a binational film. And I think it's quite good because in Brazil most of the films are financed by the state. I mean, they are public funds, and it's an opportunity for a production. I mean, a film from India, for example, to raise Brazilian money, and in some ways, and to open the market. You know, because what we usually do in our co-productions, I mean, the film we have just shown here, we had a co-production agreement with Uruguay. And we did it, and we didn't have a co-production agreement. I mean, a state co-production agreement between Brazil and Germany, but we also did a co-production with a partner in Germany, and the international. I mean, the territory, Germany territory, belongs to the co-producer, so he has the power to work the film inside his territory. So I think this is nice because it also during the process helps us, I mean the producers, to have the international vision and of how our film can reach the German public and can reach the Uruguayan public. So this is quite constructive, we think.
so Vikramji, I mean, we could end on the note that we seem to be in a different league in India because most of our production is private. I mean, NFDC is like one body which is like a small drop in the ocean. So it's like mostly private. So, but these people are backed by their states, these countries. So how does that work? I mean, does it create any sort of problem?
No, but you have to see, Shobal, that normally in India, as a market, is very similar to the US market. So most of our filmmakers are telling differentiated stories and their own innovations that they're bringing in, primarily to domestic audiences. And it's very rarely that somebody is actually stepping out and wanting to collaborate with an international filmmaker from any of these countries or from Europe. Most of the filmmakers are pushing the creative boundary within here, and probably for the Indians and the Pan-Asian audiences that stay worldwide, and some of them are now looking into the realm of how they can kind of tie up with Hollywood distribution houses from a distribution perspective. I think more and more we have a growing independent indie sector, as they call it, with a lot of young contemporary filmmakers from across the country who are willing to have conversations with people from international and are willing to kind of look at what it would mean for an international collaboration. So NFDC is pushing that envelope, but yes, rightly so, the commercial market in India is far superior to this growing phenomena of wanting to do international collaboration.
These indie filmmakers who are trying to look outwards, they're also being forced by the fact that within the domestic market, there's very little space for them because it's a very commercially oriented.
I mean, it's a lot like in our right-hand market, you have a left-hand drive car. So it's a niche market at the end of the day. But it has to be pushed. And like Choti Koot went out and did something for a Punjabi film. Kissa is a Punjabi film. Today Gautam Ghosh is doing a Hindi film. So right. So
okay, now we'll open it to the audience questions.
Hello. Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for your good views on the subject. And actually, when we talk about the co-production and the way forward, so we find the more blockages than the solutions. If you talk about the Russian market or some solution with the government,
So is there a question that you have in mind for one of the panelists? I mean, What
yeah,
exactly?
This is the question. Actually, should come forward with some solution. Either the private sector should come forward, or there should be some solution from the government part, so that we can collaborate with them.
And then you want to take that? I mean, what do you say?
Can I just
Yeah,
chip in?
yeah.
From a South African perspective, there would be no issue because although a lot of films, not all films, do have their initial funding from the National Film and Video Foundation, that's not enough to make a film. So there's always private equity funding as well. So it's mixed funding usually. Some films are purely private funding. So there would be no problem of matching equity for equity, and that would be completely feasible. There'd be no issue with that. The fact that some films have state funding wouldn't stand in the way, because it's usually a kind of mixed economy that's happening with some state subsidy, but that usually makes up a relatively small portion of the budget, maybe 20% of the budget of a average film, maybe.
So
I might be stood to grade too.
So you should go to South Africa.
Yeah.
Go to China.
Can I make
For
a
him,
point?
yeah, thanks.
Yes. One thing that I think it's quite important that co-production is not just a contract. Co-production is almost like a marriage because you make decisions together. Yes, that's true. And we had problems before, and we have won a fund, and the co-producer we had from Argentina just gave up. He didn't want it anymore. So what happened? We just missed the money. So we managed to get another partner and to marry with him. But it's quite important to have the confident relationship with your co-producer. But because in Brazil, if it happens in Brazil, for example, you just miss the money.
You said it's 30% from the state only. How much
No, the state can put up to 100%.
Yeah, there are umpteen cases of films falling through because there's a co-production and the co-producers don't see eye to eye after a point. That it's not like unusual. Your case is like one of the hundreds that happen
And
every year.
you're going to
as
deal
these
with
people
the
are telling.
co-producer for 10 years, because that's how long the films they take time to happen and to.
I wonder if there isn't also an argument. I've heard a lot of South African producers saying that co-productions are very, very lengthy in their time to put off because there's so much logistical paperwork to do, and it almost isn't worth the while. And the other issue, which has often been come up, and maybe this is because traditionally we've done more co-productions with the West, is that the price for paying, for example, editing in Germany or France or one of the countries we have co-production with, is so high that it cancels out any benefit you get from getting state funding or soft funding from those sources. So sometimes the logistics and also the price kind of makes it not worthwhile. And that's why I also think it would be very exciting to have more co-production deals with BRICS countries, why I'm very excited that there are Indian and Russian and Chinese co-productions underway, is because I think our economies see more eye to eye, so maybe expense is more similar. And I would just really urge that the kind of legalities are made as simple as possible so they don't overwhelm producers and put people off.
Great.
That question about this Chinese co-production did not happen because the producer backs up co-producer.
But is he aware of your co-producer? How would he answer? He's not aware of a co-producer.
We don't have much time, so please keep your questions very brief.
Yeah. Can we just move on if you are fine with that? Yeah. Okay. I
Well,
would
let him
want,
just take, if he can answer it, otherwise you ask a question.
because he doesn't know your
Because he
co-producer.
wouldn't know the case. No, he doesn't.
Yeah, he doesn't know his case.
What will he say?
He's not actually very clear about the
Yeah, exactly. Because he's not aware of the producer he's
not
talking
part of
about.
the
So we
deal.
can move
Yeah,
on.
can we just ask, first of all, thank you all for being here and cutting it short. I would want to know a very specific question from all of you. First, that what was the budget of your film and how much did it make in the circuit in returns, as in the box office collections? That's first question. And then the second question, very specific to Mr. Vikramaditya, that how much was the lunchbox, collections from the international circuit?
I don't think I can share with you the finite numbers, but if you,
that's what interests.
But let me just say this to
Yeah.
you, to give you a perspective on the lunchbox, because the collaboration was right and it worked because all the co-producers, as all my colleagues here have said, have fulfilled their parts. We were able to get a very good sales agent, the Match Factory, in the Cannes Film Festival. And the Match Factory sold it practically to, and they found Sony Pictures Classics.
55 nations.
So they sold it to as many nations as there are on the map. They sold it to all of them. So you had the film play out from Australia to the US, which is the main market, to Latin America, to Asia, to Africa. And Europe. So they kind of played out everywhere. So there are 55 to 60 odd nations that played the film. And in India, it did a pretty decent box office because it also had UTV and Karan Johar, who was supporting the film. So it got a mainstream positioning. So suffice to say that the monies, the cost of production was recovered. And
could you give us a number in X's? Like, if let's say X was the amount, was it the returns 2x, 3x, 4x?
I would say right now the way it's going, around 3x.
That's decent.
Yeah, it is a extremely. I would say this is a benchmark.
Yeah, that's
if
what I was
anybody were
trying
to
to
look
get
at a benchmark for India, they would look at it.
Somebody was telling me in Cannes this year that because it went to so many countries, they're still working out how much money has come from.
Because each, the fact is that Sony Pictures Classics has then had a distribution tie-up with the distributor in that market. So there is a certain contract that they have. The money comes in, gets into the sales agent, and there's a collection agent. So it's pretty complicated. So the collection agent then says, okay, you've got so much from this territory, as per your contract. You see, what happens is, when you do a co-production deal, you have 3 territories. You have India, assuming India is doing the co-production. You have India, and then you have their specific territories. So it would be Brazil, Russia, or China, or South Africa. And then there is something called the rest of the world. So there are 3 territories. Now the rest of the world is very complicated because then who's selling it, how is it done, what is the distributor's deal, where is the money coming in. So you also have your cash flow, you also have your profit, and you also have equity shares for everybody. So where is the waterfall? It's called the waterfall. So how is the waterfall actually balancing out? And therefore, how is the repatriation of funds happening to different accounts? It's pretty complicated.
So basically 3x is what we are looking at in the best case scenario.
In the best case scenario. But even if you're an X minus 1, how does it matter? The fact is you push the envelope.
But
the fact is
financially,
that
if you're not,
setting
because
up
in India, like I'll talk from my individual perspective, because generally we produce and direct our own movies. So when we're talking about a small number or a decent number, state is not funding us. We need to make that money, more money, so that we can put in that money in our next project and take some money out. Because at the end of the day, it is also a business.
But Shival, this is like, this is a chicken and the egg. I mean, if you want to make money, take Salman Khan. The question is, if you want to go this route, it's a hard-working route. You have to look at it from an investment portfolio. You have to see this as an investment, and then absolutely. I mean, today, because Anup Singh, if you ask me, Kissa, we haven't yet made back our money. But the fact is, we were able to play in different territories in the world, is setting up a footprint. Today, when Anup Singh is doing his film with a Swiss producer, with Irfan and a very famous Iranian, what's her name? Gulshifteh Farhani. I'm sure his market from Kissa, there would be a greater fillip. So you have to see it from that perspective. You cannot, if you're just doing box office, you might as well make your Bollywood movie and get done with it.
Yeah, there might not be instant returns, but there's a long-term investment.
You have to look at it from a long-term investment.
In goodwill, you are actually investing in creating
You have to be recognized.
demand.
You have to work that market. It's a very hard-working model. It's not just easy to say, okay, let's co-produce.
So do we have any more questions? Yeah.
Okay,
That's the last question.
Some films are very global in their approach as far as cultural acceptance is concerned. So we have a pretty decent example of Brazil. The greatest Brazilian film, City of God, was inspiration of Gangs of Wasseypur. So why cannot there be a platform? It's not about cultural acceptance, I believe. It's about, it's about going forward and taking a step. So why cannot be there a platform where if I'm inspired from a story of your country, so I can just collaborate into it and just make money through it. So why can't there be a platform as such? It's not a question of cultural acceptance.
No, nobody stops a filmmaker from taking inspiration. You can take every filmmaker is inspired by something or the others.
Yeah, as long as you have a copyright bit settled.
Yeah, as long as you know. That yeah, I mean, in India, we've been doing this for so many decades, lifting
without copyright.
without copyright, ripping off ideas. So I think just one more question.
So what do you think about the value of product marketing to films? Like when we are doing global marketing, there are some companies like in Bollywood, in Shah Rukh Khan films, they are endorsing the products and making money from the products. Same can be in the co-production movies, and how to create interest of heritage tourism through co-productions.
Of course, I mean, so two parts. I'm sorry, should I take this? Okay. So there are two parts. One is product. That will be subject to your product endorsement. So that is subject to your screenplay. That is purely subject to your screenplay. You know, none of the international producers, because they represent a certain creative style of filmmaking, will die for a product to be endorsed. If it warrants their screenplay, they will surely go out and reach that product and do it tastefully. So, as you said, you know, the commercial sector and the indie sector, the creative sector, there are different nuances, different objectives. Second part, on tourism, the Film Facilitation Office, which I represent, we would be very keen, actually I want to meet with him and with all of them and see how we can get more and more international films, not if they're co-productions, great, but international films to shoot in India. And we're also tying up with various state governments to ensure that when these films are shot in India and when they're released, there is a proper marketing done from a tourism perspective, so that more and more people from these lovely countries keep coming to India and wanting to see the various sets or the various locations where these beautiful filmmakers and these creative filmmakers have actually shot their films. So yes, that's a step in that.
Recently, like Shah Rukh Khan's fan release, and that was shot at Croatia, but Croatia was not able to market themselves through the fan.
I'm sorry, I'm not in a capacity.
So let's end it there. Thank you.
If you have any other
questions, you can always ask offline.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us here.